What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Compile Swift podcast. I'm your host, Peter Whittam. You can find myself and this podcast at compileswift.com. In this episode, we're going to talk about data, and specifically CoreData, iCloud, syncing, all that fun stuff in your app, and some ways to mitigate some of the problems that come along. So where's this coming from? Well, I'm working on an update for my Job Finder Tracker app. It uses CoreData and iCloud CloudKit for syncing, and that all works beautifully. They're super simple to use, implement, and fantastic. Now, I'm also adding a feature where you can store your resume as well. And that's just kind of a side note here, but again, it's more data, right? Now, of course, over time, you hope that you're going to have users, and you hope that they're going to store lots of wonderful data in your app and use it, and life will be fantastic. Well, that's mostly true, right? Because you've got to allow for certain situations, and those are the ones I'm going to talk about here today, and hopefully give you a few little pointers as to how you can deal with some of these things, and suggestions, and just things to look out for. So let's dive in at the beginning here and start with the simple one, right? Which is really the crux of the problem. When a user installs your app for the first time, that first run experience, they're not going to have any data on CloudKit. There won't be any structure there for it, right? So you've got to allow for that. Now, thankfully, that's not too much of an issue, because once they add some data, you can store it. Life is good and away it goes. However, there's one catch. You need to make sure and check that they are logged in. Now, I know this probably sounds like an edge case. Some ways it is, I guess, right? That you need to make sure that they are logged into their iCloud account. Because if they're not, guess what? Nothing's going to happen. And it's not going to tell you unless you do something to, defend against that. So here's how I've done it. And maybe there's better ways, but when they go to the first screen in my app that requires the data, the first thing I do and the first thing I check is, are they logged in? This is actually pretty straightforward to do, right? So mine is a Swift UI app. Let me start there. And I've just got an on-change event, right? And I'm going to give you the code here. Don't worry, it's not complicated. And in fact, it'll pretty much write itself for you if you follow the documentation. So when the content view, for example, comes up, there's an on-change handler, on-change of scene phase, right? And then I've just got an underscore in, and I just say let container equals ck container.default. Right, CloudKit. And then container.account status. Put this in a closure here. Account status, followed by a comma, and then error in. And then all you got to do is check it and just say, if account status equals .available, do my thing because they're logged in. And if they're not, do something else, right? In my case, what happens is, if they're not logged in, I actually have a Boolean. And I say, it's true if they're logged in. It's false if they're not logged in. And then that, of course, is tied to some state. And if it's false, I just put a nice little message up on the screen that says, hey, you need to be logged into CloudKit you need to be logged into your iCloud account to use this app. Simple as that. Now, here's one of the cool things you can do, right? If you want to, you can do something fancy here and take advantage of what Apple's done for you. So you can display some text, and a button or however you want to do this link that says log into iCloud. And then you can actually tell the app to open up the user's settings on their device and ready for them to log in. And you do that by just dispatching a queue, main async. You can say UI application.shared.open with the URL, and the format of that string is kind of a funny one, right? I'm sure you've done this before. If you haven't, this is how you throw links around to open other applications. But this one's got a fun name. So to open the settings on an iPhone or whatever Apple device, the string is app_prefs::root equals castle. I don't know why it's that. I got it from the Apple documentation, But if you put that in there and try and open the URL, it's going to open up the settings in your app. And then boom, the user can log in, go back to your app. Life's going to be great. Maybe. We'll talk about that in a second. Hey folks, if you like what you're hearing in this podcast and you want to help this podcast to continue going forward and having great guests and great conversations, I invite you to become a Patreon supporter. You can go to patreon.com/CompileSwift, where you will get ad-free versions of the podcast along with other content. If they don't log in, the state is going to be the same. So the app's going to not work for them and probably give them the same response, right? Because they're not logged in. Now, if your app relies on CloudKit for storing data, at the end of the day, the user doesn't really have much of a choice. They either use the app by logging in or they don't use the app. And, unless you're going to provide some other third option, that's pretty much the way it goes here. Now, here's the fun part. When they go back to the app, if you don't do anything, there's a very good chance, the app's not going to refresh. No state has changed until you tell it to do something to go check that connection again. And then it's going to see, oh, I'm connected now. So user is logged in is true, and away we go. However, the funny part that I noticed in testing this, when I was doing a live stream, I live stream regularly in case folks don't know, go to twitch.tv/compiledev. And you'll see a video session of this. Sometimes I've noticed if you wait long enough, it seems like somewhere along the way it refreshes itself in the system. Next thing you know, it just updates the screen and it's good to go. But it's not exactly reliable, and I don't know if it's a bug on my side or if that's by design, but either way, it's not a predictable outcome for the users, so it is not something you should do or should trust. So what you should do is when you go back to the app, you should refresh that state to check and see, okay, are they logged in now, right? Maybe you do app to background, app to foreground event, or whatever it may be of your choice. But I recommend that you take control of the situation and check it. And then once they're logged in, show the appropriate screen with the appropriate data and so on. However, it's still not that simple. I know. There's always these catches, right? Sometimes, too, I've noticed that it sort of would do it, but it hasn't got all the data yet. So, again, you should probably do a better job than I did and protect against that by saying, all right, you know what? Don't update or let the user do anything in the app until I've got all the data. And I'll explain why. Here's the scenario. If you've got a list of things, and that list has not appeared on the screen, but you know it exists because you're the developer and you're testing it, right? And you've got data. Well, if you add a new row to that data, it's going to work. And it'll store it on the back end because context, right? It'll take care of it once you update the context. And then at some future point, it'll actually show the entire list from the back end plus your new data. And it can make for a bit of a weird experience for the user, right? So I got nothing, I add something, that goes away, and now I got a bunch of things. That is not a desirable user workflow experience. So be very careful with all of this is what I'm saying. Think it through and plan ahead a little bit. The documentation on how to do all this stuff is actually very good and helped me solve the problem, along with some suggestions from the live chat room on the stream. And thank you to those folks. It did present some interesting things that you would think would be edge cases, but actually turn out to happen way more than you seems likely. Especially if iCloud is having a bad day, right? That's the other thing. This could take a while sometimes, depending on the amount of data and whether iCloud's having a good day or a bad day. User's network connection, how quickly the phone's running, all of these things. I want to put this out there this week because it was just an interesting scenario, and I thought I should talk about this and offer this up. I'm not the first person this has happened to. I'm certain of that. Unless I did it in such a bad way that I am the first person this happened to, in which case, hey, that's on me. Hope this has been helpful, though. And, this is definitely one of those things I think eventually everybody stores data in the cloud for their users, some way or another. And you've got to watch out for these interesting I don't want to say sync problems, but more user workflows and making sure they can and cannot do the right things based on the status of that sync. So that's it, folks. That's what I got for you. If this has been helpful, you know what to do. Go tell someone about it. Leave a review. Greatly appreciate that. You want to go the extra step? Why not be a Patreon member and help support the future of this podcast? Go to patreon.com/CompileSwift. Any donations are greatly welcome. If you sign up there, you get the advert-free versions of the podcast, and you also get the satisfaction of knowing that you're keeping this Swift-based podcast alive at a time where we see so many disappearing, right? We need to support our creators. Other than that, reach out to me, compileswift.com, right? All the usual places, all the usual networks. That's it, folks. I hope you have a great week. We are 1 week closer to WWDC 24. I will speak to you soon.